Our next guest is a screenwriter by trade, someone who has worked at all major movie studios in nearly every genre of film, with credits including Never Back Down and Sniper Homeland Security. He is the author of Deep State and Savage Road, both of which are critically acclaimed and have featured jaw-dropping twists that have become a hallmark of his career as a novelist. ChrisHauty, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
Chris, before we get into talking about the books, can you tell readers the story about how you got into screenwriting? I love this story because you told me before, literally your life changed overnight, right?
Yeah, well, my life has changed overnight a couple times in a way. The first time was many years ago in the late 1980s, and I had been in New York for a few years after graduating from college, and not to date myself, and I was working as a paste up artist, just an hourly job to support my playwriting habit. And the playwriting habit was not exactly paying the rent. So I decided that maybe I would try writing for the movies or TV. And I got a job, a very low paying job reading screenplays for a New York based film producer. And that was essentially my education in the film scripting world, which is the same advice I always give everyone. They ask me how to learn how to screenwrite or the best avenue to becoming a screenwriter. I always say just read screenplays for somebody, for a film producer or studio. Anyway, so I got some semblance of an education of what a screenplay should look like. And I wrote a screenplay, 120 pages, Sean Penn-like protagonists, and knew absolutely no one in the film business except for the guy I was reading for, who passed on the script. And so I sent it out to a buddy of mine here in Los Angeles who was trying to be a screenwriter. And he sent that script out to real film producers he had made contacts with here in Los Angeles. And I had forgotten about the whole process by then because I figured, probably nothing much would happen with it. And I was at my job in the like 9 o'clock at night, and someone came up and told me I had a phone call. This is pre-cell phone days. And so I picked up the phone, and it was a film producer in Los Angeles, which was like a small miracle, like a real, someone legitimate was calling me and complimenting me about my screenplay. And so he said, you should be out here in Los Angeles writing for the movies. It's paradise out here. And I said, well, that sounds like a great idea. And he's asked if he could send the screenplay to an agent friend of his at a big agency. I said, most certainly. I've been trying to get an agent as a playwright for a number of years unsuccessfully. So about 15 minutes after I hung up on that call, I got a second call from that relatively big film agent. And he said, I heard you've written a great screenplay. You should be out here in Los Angeles. It's paradise. And I'm beginning to get a sense that this might be the standard line that they say to hayseeds like myself. And I said, that sounds great. And he said, let me read it, and we'll fly you out here, and I'll send you all the studios. And then 15 minutes after I got the phone with that guy, a real live film executive at Paramount Studios, vice president at Paramount, calls me and says essentially the same thing, including you should really be out here. It's paradise. And so that all sounded great. Then the agent and the studio exec actually read the screenplay, and the little bit of buzz that had been building to fly me out there quickly deflated. And they said, essentially, we'd love to see the next one, and no free ticket to Los Angeles. So um, I just decided to fly myself out there, and the agent, to his credit, sent me around to about 4 or 5, 6 different meetings around town, and the last meeting was with that vice president at Paramount, who I expected to be, as an executive at Paramount, I was expecting a white-haired guy in a business suit and an attaché case, and it turned out to be a guy a couple of years younger than me, wearing sandals and long kind of surfer hair. And anyway, he gave me my first job. So I flew back to New York City, packed up a U-Haul, and drove across country, and the rest is history. But same thing sort of happened with how I got into writing books. Honestly, I mean, Ryan, when you said screenwriter by trade, I still have one pinky toe in film and TV. But I really consider myself a novelist by trade, and happily so at this point.
That's a fantastic story, Chris. I mean, I love how you had your dream and you just went out there and lived it and took that risk. I think there's a lot to be said about taking risks. So
yeah, I think what I always encourage new writers, if, whether it's in books or film and TV, it's like if you see a glimmer, if you see any kind of opening at all, you run at it and break right through. There is no shame in the creative arts. There shouldn't be. You should never ever feel like you're not good enough. Yeah, that was something I learned early on.
I'm a huge fan of Haley Chill, and I really wanted to say how pleased I am that you chose to write a female protagonist. And I wondered if you encountered in Haley's role any advantages or disadvantages to her being a female.
Well, the advantages are selfishly, her disadvantages in her world are my advantages as a writer. The conflicts and the issues that a female protagonist and a female character, for that matter, I think most definitely in the political and military thriller worlds that the genre creates, I just think they're heightened. It's not to say that it's a cakewalk for our male protagonists, but it's just the underdog story is always a more interesting story for me, and I think by the nature of our society and our culture, a female, an active female character, particularly in that world, is going to be inherently an underdog. So yeah, it's and the other aspect of it is choosing a female protagonist is just that there were fewer of them, and so by that nature, frankly, it's just easier to break new ground with your character and the issues and the sequences that you put her into.
Chris, I know you're a motorcycle guy. How did your love for motorcycles start, and what are you currently writing?
It really started fairly recently. I had my girlfriend at the time, about 8 years ago. She spent half of the year in Rome, and so I would go over in the summers and visit her. And the best way to get around was on a Vespa, and I had never really done two wheels before. I mean, I tried, like when I was in high school. My older brother was at UVA, and he had a little bike, little motorcycle, and I took it for a spin and managed to spill it and pop a hole in the crankcase. And then another time, I was living on Orcas Island after college, and I don't know where the hell that motorcycle came from, but I had access to a little motorcycle and dropped that too on pavement, and I gave myself a decent dose of road rash, and that was it. I didn't want any more to do with motorized two wheels. My first job out of college in New York City was a bike messenger, and that was fearless and also totally insane. But anyway, so when I was in Rome, I just got on that Vespa a little intimidated and took to it like duck to water, and really loved zipping around Rome on those things. And so when I got back to LA, at a certain point, a buddy of mine was moving and had a Vespa, and so I drove that around or rode that around LA for about a year, and I guess I pulled up to a stoplight one time, and I was on my Vespa, and and a motorcycle pulled up alongside of me, and the dude just wouldn't even look at me. You know, there's a real there's a real bias against Vespas are supposed to be ridden by different types of people than 6'2" males, I guess. But anyway. So I resolved to I had outgrown the Vespa essentially, and learned how to, took a course and got a Triumph Street Scrambler, which is kind of like it's a modern bike. It was a 2017, but it's made to look like a classic motorcycle, and I love it. And I recently moved from Venice, which is flats and the beach, to the hills between Glendale and Pasadena, and so it's beautiful motorcycle riding around here. A lot of fun.
That's awesome, Chris. I actually grew up riding dirt bikes with my brothers, and we had this Can-Am that was so tall that I literally couldn't put my feet down. So we would just my dad would hold it up for me. I would take off, ride, and then come back so he could grab it from me. So I've been a long time motorcycle fan, and I really like the Beamers.
I wouldn't mind having a couple more ponies in the barn there, and I would love to get a BMW motorcycle.
Well, I hope you do.
Yeah.
So in Savage Road, a computer hacker plays a really critical role. I wonder, did you do a deep dive into cybercrime? And are there any insights or information or facts that you learned that you can share with us?
Well, I just so happen to have in my bookcase, I read probably 5 or 6 books, but 2 of them were really helpful in the sense that they were the most current. This guy, Richard Clark,
yeah,
who, he runs a private firm now. He's been in and out of government. Really excellent book. And Ted Koppel's book, Lights Out, is actually very good too. Those were the 2 most helpful in terms of sort of getting across the broader issues in layman terms. What's happening, what's at stake, the risks, and what's being done about it. The one thing that was the biggest shock, it was, no pun intended, the whole thing, the reason why the second book is about cyber warfare is, I was looking for a threat. That's what all of us, we're just looking for threats. And that came up as number 1 when I first started casting around for ideas, whenever that was, like a year and a half ago. It's changed a little bit since then, but and so I started reading these books, and after I'd finished reading the books, I went out and bought a generator and 30 months supply of freeze-dried food. So, the big points that were so a revelation to me was the fact that so much of this malware was already in place, which is what I talk about in a a narrative idea that I exploit quite a bit in the book. This stuff has already been laid in by bad actors and good actors and God knows who. No one knows who's responsible. It's almost like, I think of it as like almost like a minefield after, a war has come and gone, and the minefield is still there, and all and forgotten about. They don't even, who knows who placed some of this stuff. And so that was a big revelation. And the other kind of, at the time, the thing that was surprising to me was that both of these guys, Ted Koppel and Richard Clark, talk about is the fact that civilian defenses are so marginal. All the stuff, whether it's the electrical grid or the banking system or hospitals, all those soft targets, they're soft targets. They're very vulnerable to cyber attack, and still are. But the book suggested that the government and military networks and systems were hardened and relatively impervious to attack. And so that was then, and that's what I thought when I wrote the book. If I was starting to write the book now, it would be somewhat different, because this recent attack that Russia undertook on us, that we still don't really know the full extent of, because all the air was sucked out of the room by the election. That was a big story. But the solar winds hack, and that means, if it's any consolation, the government and military is no more secure than the civilians. I guess that was a later breaking revelation from that whole topic.
Yeah, that certainly makes us feel good.
That's me, Mr. Feel Good.
Yeah. So when I first read a super early advanced copy of Deep State, I had no idea you were a screenwriter. I didn't know anything about you other than the name on the cover. But I immediately noted that the story was in first person present tense, which almost nobody writes in except for maybe like Don Winslow. It felt like a movie, and I said to someone, it felt like it read like a screenplay almost. So when I found out your background, it clicked. It made so much sense. For you, how is writing a novel different than writing a screenplay, though?
Well, it's 1,000% more liberating, in the sense that I can do stuff that I never could do as a screenwriter, and no one can. And that doesn't even have anything to do with, except for maybe, even Quentin Tarantino is limited by the 2-hour length of a typical 2-hour length of a movie, and relatively linear, even though he's someone who fractured the hell out of the linear narrative in film, but still you can't really get into a character's head. You can't really mess around with drastic geographical changes, and just novelistic devices that aren't filmic. So there are just inherently, bigger, wider spaces to occupy in writing a novel. With a movie, it's all about economy. It's got to be, it used to be 120 pages long. Now they like it about 105 pages long. And so, it's just, it's more writerly, frankly. Writing a novel is just more writerly. Not to mention the fact that an author is making all the choices and making all the decisions. An editor is there to take your manuscript and help make it better, and maybe guide you towards limiting or trimming some places. Whereas when you turn in, you can't even like start writing a screenplay until any number of people have signed off on some, I mean, obviously the big decisions, but even much smaller ones. I mean, so it really just comes down to a matter of freedom, um, uh, of, of both the aesthetic and the business of it. But in other ways, I mean, it's very similar for me. I mean, plenty of readers have suggested that, my books are read like a screenplay. And sometimes they say that in a sort of pejorative sense, which is fine. I did it because it seemed more immediate to me as a reader. Uh, to write in that style. And also, it's something I'm familiar with and very comfortable with, writing in that voice. And also, again, in the same way that I decided to write a female protagonist, it just is, I've always wanted someone to be able to, if a page fell out of one of my books and you picked it up and started reading it, you would know it was from a ChrisHauty book. And that's just important to me. I want to, really create a stamp and signature style.
I love that. And I think you have done that, by the way.
Cool.
So I understand, Chris, that you're very passionate about Greek mythology. So how does that influence your work, whether it's screenplays or novels?
Well, it was, that the Greek mythology was like the earliest, probably very juvenile interest. It was probably my first genre, as a reader. I think the influence that it has on my writing, it's probably there. I think, I am a glutton for story. I mean, I consume more story in one form or another than probably most people. Not just books, but film and TV. And when I read the newspapers, I'm always gravitating towards story. There was a story in the newspaper today about that was, I can't remember. It was just such a crazy little story. So instead of reading, a long discourse about the latest pandemic figures in Los Angeles County, it's like, body found in burning car on Mulholland Drive. I'm like, oh my God, what's the story? So those were, the Greek mythology stories were just so basic and with such great characters that for a kid, were very identifiable and relatively spare in their both in their prose and in their narratives. So I guess, and that probably translates to what I do now. It's like I think my stuff reads pretty fast. Again, that comes from screenwriting really as well, but maybe I have attention deficit problems or something. But I do like it's not necessarily a fast-paced narrative per se, and it's not one that's all action, but just something that's clear, the clarity of it. Like Hemingway was another big influence post Greek mythology. And again, I just responded to the kind of simplicity, the sort of, it's a, kind of a false simplicity to that kind of literature.
So who's your favorite character in Greek mythology?
I think Poseidon. I've always been an ocean guy and swimmer guy, so Poseidon.
You should read James Rollins' last book. But look, I got to tell you, your writing is so clean and so fast. Before we started the interview, Kim and I were talking, and I said, I love his books, your books, because there's no filler. All the stuff that you normally want to skip from other people's stuff is just not there. I love that. It's all story. It's all, yeah, I love that.
Well, Elmore Leonard also is a huge influence, and he's, I think, maybe probably other people, celebrated authors have said the same thing, but you know, in editing, leave out the stuff that people don't want to read. You know, I feel the same way. You know, I know when I read every word of a book that I'm really loving the book. And if I'm skimming just to kind of get the story, or impatient with a long sequence or paragraph that isn't engaging me, you know, less of a affinity for the book. It's not to say that everything. I mean, I have my little digressions, but I just think that they need to. You know, you really need to sell it. You need to make it interesting, make it surprising, make it dynamic, make the language interesting, and have texture, all that stuff. You know, I read a lot of screenplays, and you know, I could always in coming up as a screenwriter, and I could, you know, oftentimes it looked right, it was the right length, all the formatting was right, but it was just typing. You know, it's just, you know, there isn't a voice. I think the same is true with books. I think it really is super important to develop a voice in your writing.
Well, I can talk about your books all day. You know, I'm a huge fan, especially the new one, Savage Road. But first, let me ask you, let's talk Deep State movie. Any update there? And just to confirm, would you be the one doing the screenplay?
It's been a process. The book was optioned by a TV studio, which will go unnamed because they said they didn't want it publicized unless it was sold to the networks. And so, and you know, since I have 30 years experience writing, not writing margin to margin as a screenwriter, I was positioned as the writer in an if-come deal. So the way that works, there's a deal for the optioning the book, and then there's a if-come deal for writing the pilot if we sold it to a network. Mm-hmm. So we made those deals over 2 years ago when the book was first, even before it was published. And it's been a long and winding road. And I'll spare you all the gruesome details. But after being partnered with one writer showrunner who's left the scene, they brought in a new showrunner, and that's been a much better relationship between she and myself. And I came up with a take on how to do the show and wrote up a pitch. And since we're all in lockdown and not going, normally what you would do is you would go with your showrunner and your producers and traipse around town pitching to all the streamers and all the broadcast networks. But we're not doing that anymore. Now they started doing Zoom like we're talking today, but people in the business have kind of gotten tired of doing the Zooms as well as probably the rest of humanity. And so now they're actually looking at written pitches. So my written pitch for adapting Deep State as an ongoing TV series is at networks now. And literally, I mean, we could hear today the option expires a week from this past Wednesday. So this coming Wednesday, and we'll see.
Look, no pressure, but it'd be kind of nice if you could get that call right now. We could break that here on Thriller Talk. That'd be all good, man.
That would be sweet. that would be a Thriller Talk first.
Yes, it would.
And going on now.
I have hopes. I mean, I could see it as a TV show. I would dearly love doing it as a movie, a series of movies. That would just kind of. I've finished book 3, and it's in Emily Bestler's hands. I'm crazy about the book. I'm crazy about all of them, but your most recent one is always like, oh my God, this one I love the most. And you've already in the first 2 books, you've seen there is a continuity. There's a through line in Haley's story that plays out in the 3rd book. And so very much, though these 3 first books form a loose trilogy, which I think exists well enough as a standalone, but each one is a standalone. But I think that they could work either way, as a show. But if the TV thing doesn't work out, my agent and I, my film agent, we're all prepared to go after the film people, which is where most of my experiences. I mean, my produced credits are in movies. Like everybody in the movie business, I've put my toe in the film and TV world. You have to, but movies are really where my heart are.
Well, yeah. I found it quite interesting, Chris, that sometimes I love the idea of a streaming TV show just because you have a very meaty plot, and it gives you a lot more time, to develop those subplots and to enjoy it. Where I understand the movies, are a little bit more compressed, and sometimes you even have to distill 2 characters into one, right?
Yeah. I think I wouldn't have to do that in a movie. I mean, I think that again, that comes from my background, in conceiving the story in such a way it would really be easily translated. But you're exactly right. With a TV show, I could get into, like with Deep State, for instance. Unlikely there are any spoilers with your viewers. I could explore the hit team more and get into their, particularly Sinatra, and like he's the one who's most fleshed out, and sort of explore what he was all about. So, yeah, I mean, it would be fun. Like I said, I would love it either way, but what I'm most keen on is not just throwing the book at film and TV and walking away. I'd rather, if I can't be involved and essentially create it or write it if it's a film, write it, and if it's a TV show, create it and set the tone and world and characters and ensure that we're essentially going to follow the plots of what's in the book, I'd rather not do it. But for instance, when I said that in the first year of the option on Deep State, my partner, who's a good guy, I agreed to have him on, but after he was already on board, then he steered the project in such a way that he didn't want to have the ending that I had in Deep State. He wanted to change the ending, and
it's like the best part of the book too, by the way.
What?
I mean, that would be hard to explain to the fans. Jack Reacher, it's like, okay, he's not, doesn't look like Tom Cruise, okay, but it's still Tom Cruise. that would be tough to explain. That's not a big change. So anyway, I've learned some lessons from all of that, and really just, I feel a lot of, I feel more, maybe no big shock, more ownership of my books than I did with any of my screenplays. Because when you write a screenplay, you go into it, even if it's an original um, screenplay, you go into it. You better go into it, unless you're a writer director writing a sort of Sundance type movie. You go into it knowing, like, once you sell it or option it, you have no say. It's over. You're no longer in the driver's seat.
That's
Um,
that's fascinating, Chris. I mean, your insights into both worlds, it's quite helpful for us because we tend to talk to mostly novelists. So before we let you go today, could you kindly share with us a little bit more about Savage Road and any other projects that you're working on now?
well, it's always tricky talking about Savage Road because and I know some of book bloggers have had similar issues with how much to describe it because of I start popping off with twists and turns pretty quickly,
Hmm.
and even to the extent that you can't know for a fact if someone's read Deep State or not. But uh, in brief, Savage Road picks up a few months after the conclusion of Deep State, and Haley Chill has received a promotion uh, uh, from being an intern in the West Wing to being a paid staffer, which has enabled her to improve her if not her wardrobe, all that much, because she's really not interested in being a fashion horse. But she's improved her living situation a bit and gotten a better apartment. Um, and her, how should I put this? Her, her other work um, uh, for um, um, the deeper state um, continues, and but that work is complicated by the return of a character in the first book, April Wu, who is also uh, working for the deeper state to thwart or help determine the origin of cyber attacks on the U.S. And there's a playful rivalry and friendship between those two uh, that complicates that mission, and Haley's original mission in Deep State in the first book um, is also complicated by by those escalating cyber attacks. I'm really kind of picking my way through the two plots as carefully as possible.
By the way, I'm enjoying it because I had to write reviews for both of these books, and it's almost impossible to do because you can't say anything.
It's difficult. But as I alluded to earlier, with all that overarching story, for me, there's a very crucial and I think equally thrilling subplot involving Haley's family history and her pursuit of the truth uh, in those incidents. And in some ways, for me, they provide the biggest kind of emotional wallops. The thrill ride of the big story, cyber warfare, and the intrigue in the West Wing are kind of the bright lights and explosions, but the real emotional tug and pull is happening with Haley's pursuit of her father's uh, uh, the true the nature of her father's death in Iraq. And in terms of what I'm working on, I have a sort of a top secret project that my literary agent would probably reach through the Zoom screen and follow me if I talked about it at this point. Top secret. So I'm not going to talk about that because I like that guy. And I've started ruminating on Haley Chill 4, and we'll probably get going on that soon. And probably I took those books. Oh, you know what? My laptop's resting on all those books. I have a stack of books about the Supreme Court. So I'm anticipating if I find the guts of a story in my research about the Supreme Court, I kind of like to maybe center Haley Chill 4 around some intrigue there. I've already talked to Ryan about this. I know before. What, at least for the time being, for the foreseeable future of this series, I'm really keeping things to a domestic front, and kind of with the idea that the enemy is within. We can be, as Americans, we can be our own worst enemies, or maybe I just don't want to travel overseas for research. But so I'm kind of looking at various institutions in the U.S., whether it's the executive branch or the intelligence community, and book 3 centers around the military, U.S. Army, and then book 4 potentially the Supreme Court, and just the things that can go wrong in those places, and how Haley Chill can help right those wrongs, and that's what I'm working on. Yeah. And maybe writing the pilot to the Deep State.
I hope so.
Chris, thank you, man, for being here. Like, as always, it's so fascinating to hear you talk about both sides of your craft, the screenwriting side, the novel side. Always a real treat to hear you talk about both and explain it to us and others that don't always know the film side, especially of this thing. So thank you for coming on. Yeah, absolutely. It was really great talking to you guys, and look forward to talking in a year about book 3. You got it, man. Unless your phone rings sooner. If you get that big phone call or you want to talk about this mystery project, you know how to find us. It will be yours to break. Let's do it. All right, man. Thanks for coming on, and be well. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.